Hey man, what's up? Jonathan Rossignol on the show, The Right Mindset. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
You and I, we met through interaction on YouTube. You started interacting on my videos. Jonathan, for anyone listening, Jonathan has an amazing YouTube channel that kind of journeys into questions and philosophies within the realm of writers and other elements. And what I love about his show is he's inclusive. And one of the reasons I wanted to get him on is he brought up a really interesting philosophical question that we actually are going to tackle today on the show. But more importantly, his information will be in the description, so you could go back and subscribe to his channel. Jonathan, John, thanks so much for being on. I'm glad you have some free time for me.
I'm glad you made the opportunity available to me.
Listen, you live up in the north. I live over in the Ohios. We have to communicate somehow, and I figured this would be the best way. So, listen, before I get any show started, I like to always throw out like a big question and see where your brain is at. All right. The first question I'm going to throw at you is: Ernest Hemingway was known to reach a daily word count of about 500 words. Other authors have said they hit a solid 1,000 to 2,000 a day. How do you feel these numbers could really discourage aspiring writers to discover their own process or potential?
Discourage them?
Yeah, so sometimes, the big debate is everyone's trying to keep up with people who write massive word counts. Like, I'll do 3,000 in a day. And sometimes that's like, whoa.
For me, it's never about word count. I know that there are people that do like writing sprints, and I've jumped in on those.
Mm-hmm.
For me, when it comes to writing, like it's really comes down to the ideas and whether or not you have something to say. I think that's a big deal. I think, in fact, that's actually probably more important than word count to some degree. Of course, that could be debated, but because of course you have like right to market people, so it all depends what your aim is. But I would say, I wouldn't let word count discourage you, and just kind of focus on writing the story that you want to write and focusing on developing the ideas, because at the end of the day, if you've written 40,000 words but nobody's interested in reading what you have to say, I mean, it's kind of a moot point.
Well, more importantly, like if you write 40,000 words and what you wrote isn't interesting to you, like you said, you're not saying anything, you're just writing a story because, well, vampires are popular now. But having vampires on the page is not as interesting as the actual conflict, or the dive into, some of the topics we're going to talk about today, where about diversity and things like that. And when you put that in a book like that's interesting. That's more interesting than I have a black character and a white character.
Sure.
It's the story of adversity or overcoming adversity and stuff like that. And I agree with you. When you're writing, it's all about that process. Whatever process helps you get through to get the story you want out, I think you have a stronger book, at least an attempt at a stronger book, than if you just kind of go, let me focus
when you're
on
focused on, I mean, when you're focused on word count, like it could be very easy to kind of like fall into the realm of like overwriting and just filling your narrative up with a bunch of fluff. I mean, which is not bad. Like in your first draft, like if in your first draft and you have a lot of fluff, it's easier to cut stuff than perhaps to add stuff. But yeah, I would say that, if word count is your focus, then I don't know, you probably are adding more pressure than what's needed, because I feel like when you focus on the ideas, or at least I can only speak on my behalf, when the idea, because when I write a story, I have something to say going into the story, so I tend to kind of weave messages into my story. So like when I'm going into a story, I already kind of have a premise in mind, so I'm going at the story and I'm thinking, how do I want to deliver, like, how am I going to deliver that message? And then the scenes start coming to my mind. Then once the scenes start coming to my mind, then it's just like word count is like Like that's just an afterthought.
Yeah, if you get 200
I'm
words
writing the
down, that's as long as you're getting the quality out of you. And you did say something that was I find interesting is you got to write stuff that hopefully people find interesting. And I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and one of the things that I was taught, especially from mentors and stuff like that, is you're actually not supposed to write for an audience. Like your book shouldn't be for like it's the same thing like when I did stand-up comedy, you'd see comics, they always say the same thing. I need the whole room to laugh. And you're like, Dennis Miller didn't need the whole room to laugh. He needed the people that like political
You did
humor to
stand
laugh.
up. You
Yeah,
did
I
stand.
I,
This is a
I
fun
still do
fact right
stand up,
now.
but what?
This is a fun fact right now. I did not. You
Yeah,
never mentioned it before.
yeah. That I did stand up. I started in comic books as an illustrator. Then I became a musician. Then I retired from the music industry after 10 years, was bored out of my mind, got into acting, comedy. I took my writing career to the next level, and I've been doing that ever since. I still do comedy. It's just the COVID, the pandemic pushed me away
Right.
from New York City. I lived in Brooklyn for a long time. So my home base was like, all Gotham Comedy Club and things like that, the Village. So, but yeah. So, but the thing, comics were always, I just need everyone to laugh, and it's like, no, Dennis Miller needed his niche audience, the people that liked his political humor. And when you're trying to find your voice as a writer, you're not trying to get people to like everybody to like your book. You're trying to get people to like your book, the book that, like you said, I'm trying to say something, and you want people to connect to it. So it's interesting when I hear writers say that, where they're like, well, you want people to like it. No, you want the right people for you to like it. It's not about the audience. You should write for yourself is
For
ultimately.
me, right, and that I'll say that right up front. Like that is like every like story that I've published it because it's the story that I wanted to write. It's the
Yeah.
story that like I was putting myself in the reader's shoes. So it's like, do I want to read this story? If I'm about to write this story, is this a story that I would want to read? And it's that's I think that that's also what you mean when you're saying like you're not writing for other people. You're
Yeah.
not writing, to for other people to be interested in the story. And now don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that like a story has to contain a message in order for it to be interesting.
Hmm.
That's I guess that I should clarify that. That's something that I have done with my stories. It's not to say that I would do that with every story as well. Like I guess it depends on the genre too.
Yeah. Of
Um,
course.
and I actually don't have anything against people who want to do like right to market or something like that.
Oh, with like vampires.
But yeah, yeah, vampire. Um, but it's just not something that I personally do. Like it's just not part of my process. And I feel like when you start getting into where the original thing was about word count. So
Yeah.
like if you start doing like getting into writing and it's about that is your aim is like hitting word count goals. And then you're like, once I hit, you know, 50,000 words or 75,000 words, then I'm going to have a novel or then I'm going to have, I'll be able
Yeah.
to start doing the editing process and then put out a piece of work. Sure, you could do it that way, or you could start by learning craft first. Learn some craft, and then maybe that gets your imagination going a little bit. And I feel like you got to have I feel like before you start writing, you pick up and you get in that creative writing mode, you have to have some sort of spark of imagination. You can't
Yeah.
just
A little bit.
yeah. I mean, you can't just like jump in there and just say, well, I'm just going to put words on a page and then just see what happens.
Yeah, we're gonna put a child in space, and they're gonna be playing a video game, but it'll really turn out to be spaceships, and they're
Hey, yeah, people like maybe there are people that really get into that bizarro stuff, but
yeah, yeah.
I like there to be some semblance of structure
Yeah,
with
you
the
need a little
story.
bit of structure. And the thing with word count though is if you write a book and you're saying I'm writing an epic fantasy, there is a word count minimum to put it into that. Uh, Unless you're self-publishing, then who really cares? You just write your 10,000 per page, 10,000 word book and be happy with yourself. And but you're right. Like when you're writing, it's really about the journey of that story. Word count. The reason I focus on word count is because I have to schedule myself. I have like deadlines. So, if somebody needs like a script or needs a book that they hired me to write, they go, I need X amount of words by this date. But the thing is, I outline like a maniac. You see me outlining live.
Yes,
So,
your outlines are very extensive, I have to say.
yeah, yeah. And by the way, what I'm outlining is just the beginning. That's not even my zero draft. That's just, like I need to beat out the scenes. And then once that's done, I just let it go. And now I'm not really thinking about word counts. I know what my speed is, but I wasn't able to charge or know where I was professionally until I started tracking my writing, my like word count. Because now if someone's like, hey, I need a book in 2 months, I go, all right, I know I could do that because X, 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 and X. And so I have to charge you
That
this
makes
much.
sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But like you're saying, indie writers and stuff, they write at your own pace.
If you're not on a time limit, I mean, why rush yourself? Why rush the process, or
Yeah.
why put unnecessary pressure on yourself, I should say, because you can really, when you don't have a time limit, you can really hone in on those on your ideas
Yeah.
and really like, take the time to kind of sit down, brainstorm, figure out like, okay, how's the best way to deliver this idea with the most, really make it punch.
Yeah, you gotta blow it up with like when you give it that time, you can sit there and focus on a plot line or a subplot. Like right now, I'm outlining a fantasy novel, and I'm just finishing Act One with the outline, my zero draft outline, and I'm at like 60,000 words. Now I know when I cut that down and I clean it up, it's going to be less because you can't have a 200,000 word uh, epic fantasy because people be like, "What's going on? There's a lot going on." Um, but even my outline, that's just my zero draft outline. It's just filled to the brim because I want to understand that scene. I want to understand how that scene influences, three scenes later, or
Now
how
this
does
is just an outline
this
though,
is just well,
because
this is my zero draft outline, which is different than an outline.
then when you go back, what I'm wondering is, okay, so now when you actually get ready to go and you start putting, words on the page as far as the novel goes,
Mm-hmm.
how much of that, if we're talking numbers, percentage wise, are you close to like a full conversion? Like, in other words, like each and every single bullet point that you're putting down in this outline,
Yeah.
are you just like straight, like one for one conversion to the actual novel, or will a lot of that stuff get cut out?
A lot of it will get cut out because I in even in the zero draft, I'll place in there the verbatim. So basically, if I want to say I'm mad at you, I will just say the character's mad at someone, or I'll write dialogue that's like right on the nose. And then when I put it to the novel, that's when maybe all the dialogue vanishes and it's all physical. It's all show and not necessarily dialogue. A lot of times the dialogue turns into subtext. Um, I just need to know in my zero draft outline exactly what the emotion is and the choices are and where it's leading. Uh, I usually don't have to do discovery because of that, because the zero draft allows me to go through discovery. And the
I see. I
outline,
see.
which you've seen, like the first live video I did, that's a straight outline for me. That's just me going, I just need to hit these plot beats for the main plot. Then I do the second outline, which is basically where I add subplots. So I go through the main plots and I go, what would be? How about there's a love interest, or the best friend is like blah blah. And
Right.
then the last couple videos you've been watching, those are me plotting out the scenes, but that's still not me doing a zero draft. That's the zero draft is when I go in there, I go, what does the story look like now? And that's when I start adding like character choices and dialogue potential, which I usually won't
So
end up using that.
it sounds to me like basically the outlining process for you is your pantsing,
Yes.
like how some people would jump right in, start with a novel, but instead of an outline, they're basically doing like what you're saying you're doing, but except they're doing it right in the novel form, whereas you're just kind of more or less saying, well, if this happened and then this happened, it's almost like you're right. It sounds like to me like you're almost writing the novel out like in a beat by beat. Like that's why I say
Yeah.
it looks extensive. So you're actually doing all the beats,
Hmm.
but you're just kind of like doing it in a note form rather than actually spelling out the narrative,
Yeah, like
if
writing
you
it out.
will.
Well, I started as a pantser, and one of my first big gigs as a paid writer, they said to me the worst thing I could ever hear at the time, which was, "Can you give me an outline before you write anything?" And I was like, "Huh? Sure." I said, "Yeah," but I had to figure. I was like, "What? I've never had to outline. This is weird," because it just was not the thing I did. And then once I learned how to outline, I was like, I really love outlining. I love it more than writing a story.
It
You,
it's
you know?
like it's almost like that's what I was going to say. It's like almost like it's almost like you're pantsing but without the fluff in
Yeah,
between. So you're hitting the beats like as if you were a pantser,
yeah,
but when you're pantsing, you can get to a point where you're like, okay, it depends if you can skip scenes too, but like just let's just say you're writing a novel and you have to do it linear, like from
yeah,
start to finish. And then you may hit a spot where you're like, okay, well, I know where I want to get the story, but the point where I'm at right now, I don't know how to get from point A to point B. So
yeah,
then they start filling in, or at least what I've seen from some of like the indie books that I've read is it you can almost tell when that they hit that point because you start getting like some kind of meandering and some kind of fluff
yeah.
getting in there, and you're like, well, that kind of seems a little bit jarring, like a little disjointed
Yeah,
right
or you
there.
get one of those like they lose their leg moments. You're like, where did that come from?
Yeah,
Like, well, I got
yeah.
to put them in a hole. Yeah, no. The, I've always liked the process of understanding the story but pantsing when I did it was what you're saying. You're literally writing a story out, and then you get to points where you're like, well, what do I do here? How to? So the outline allows me. And by the way, the first outline where I just kind of write the main point, the main plot bullet points, which is usually a sentence or two, uh, comes from me thinking about the story, but I just focus on the main plot. And then after that outline's done, I then kind of go, well, who are the characters? But I don't sit there and write, oh, this character likes the color purple. Like, I'm not that kind of person. What I do is I think in choices. So that's how I discover my characters. Like, what would their choices be? What are their wants and desires, their needs, things like that. But I do it within story. And so basically, like if I had a character and they're let's just go with the fantasy. Let's say they're in a town. They grew up their whole life in that town, and they don't want to be there anymore. So like the main plot would be them living in that town, wanting to leave that town, and they just decide to leave, but they're scared to. But then somebody comes into town, and it turns out they're interesting, and they're looking to hire a hunter. Oh, great! I'm a hunter. So then they go with that. Now that character is not interesting because they're looking for a hunter. I need to make them interesting, so I have to make choices. What got them there? Where are they going? Why did they need a hunter? And then a whole story forms for that character. And then I have to hide that story and then leak it through this story. And then that character develops, because a lot of times people just put characters in there because I need the hero, I need the comic relief, I need the tough guy. And one of the books I'm working on, I have one of my fellow
They need the
writers.
representation.
You need representation. Uh, they saw a character that I have, and they were like, "What I really loved about that character is, on the outside, they're a brute, and they're like a force, and they're just, you're like, that's the scary guy." But then you're like, no, wait, I think that character's interesting because there's so much to that character that has nothing to do with their size and strength. And they go, how did you develop that character? I go, because who they are is not what they are. What they are is a big scary guy, but who they are got them there. And I think that's more interesting in story. So that's what my discovery does, is I'm always like, well, where are they going from? But speaking of, let's talk about a couple of things. So uh you brought up the diversity thing.
Yeah.
And let me find. Okay, so just so the audience understands the position
Well,
and
more
like kind of,
specifically, representation.
yeah, representation. So there are two primary reasons why representation is important: inclusivity and perception. Seeing people who look, act, and experience life like them in the media makes a person feel included in a society, and it reinforces positive views of themselves and what they can achieve in society. According to NPR in 2016, minority literature only accounted for about 22% of all published children's books. In 2006, it was as low as 9%. This brings up the idea of the responsibility writers have to help increase representation or not. Um, right? That's kind of what you
Is it
brought
a
up.
responsibility though? Whose responsibility is that?
Exactly. That's kind of sort of like what I think we should really discuss is like, um, I've always found it almost insulting to be like, oh wait, I need a Spanish character. Like you don't need the Spanish character because now what is their purpose in that story? Is it, you know, and it's the same thing with like, all right, let's put a white character in there. It's almost insulting to just be like, well, I'm gonna hit the boxes. I need a gay person. I
Yeah,
think it has to be organic. I feel.
yeah. I mean, that's I've heard multiple people online have this discussion, which is kind of why I brought that up. So I have just a little, uh, just a quick backstory, or
Yeah.
for your viewers. So during my live streams on Mondays, I'll have a segment sometimes where I call it "Hot Topic for Content Creators." So what I do is that it's kind of like an ode to like old school YouTube format where there were no live streams, there were no panel discussions really to say. You all you could really do is just, unless you were in physically in the same room recording, on this off the same camera or whatever, or you
Yeah.
had some setup, but there was none of this. So what people would do is I called it like video pen pals. So you do a video, you upload it, and then somebody else will watch it and then do a response video. So I started the hot topics for that purpose, where it's like I pitch these topics, and then people can make a video, and then I would respond to it in kind, or they could just leave comments, and just we build upon the topic as we kind of like embroider the topic. So one of the hot topics was that representation in fiction. So that's the prompt.
Yeah.
And you can come at the topic from all different types of angles. And yes, so diversity, like what I've heard people discussing before, was the diversity issue. I kind of use that word, where it's like, that's they were throwing that under the umbrella of representation. And the one of the reason why I brought it up is because one word that people tend to throw around is the word problematic, and I
Oh
don't
yeah. Yeah.
really know, me personally, I don't really know what that word means, or what people mean when they say that word in this context, at
Hmm.
least, like when it comes to representation in fiction. Like, what do they mean by problematic?
Well, it
Because
means that the stereotypes are being used and not necessarily the person's virtues or morals. Like we were saying earlier, you know, what are you writing about? What are you trying to say? And if you're trying to say something of depth, it doesn't matter who the characters are; they just so happen to be. Um, but when you're talking about fantasy, you're also disrupting the reality of it, which is it's fantasy, and it's most likely in a world that doesn't have anything to do with Earth.
right.
And once you take Earth out of the picture, the only element of representation are usually blue, pink, and yellow skinned people because they're aliens. If it's sci-fi, if it's fantasy, you got teal. You got the fairy folk, the fae, right? Things like right.
Here's the thing. So I kind of see this in two ways, and I get what you're saying, like with using stereotypes,
Yeah,
and sure, that could be annoying, I guess. Like someone, it could be provocative,
yeah,
um, but it could also be funny too. It's all depends on context. It depends on, you know, the writer. It depends on the story. There's all these different things, and what I'm coming at it is saying, well, what do you mean by problematic? A problem for who? You know, who is this creating problems for? It's fiction. You know,
Yeah.
fiction. I'm definitely a strong proponent of freedom of speech, and in this day and age, it seems like there's all these kind of like nuanced phrases and stuff like that that seem to be getting pushed, like for instance like hate speech and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, if we're talking in the realm of fiction, like now it almost sounds like people want to have like regulate like what can be allowed in fiction. um Now this isn't to say that you can't write your own story, but now we're getting into a problem where it could affect your business, and
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that's what I take issue with. Like, who's to say what I'm allowed, what I can or cannot publish? You know what I mean? Like, only the distributor could have something to do with that. But if people keep pushing these types of agendas where like you know, they're going up in arms, well, then that could possibly be problematic, if we want to use that term, for indie writers, indie authors in general, because then you may have new regulations or whatever, or policies with the distributors that you choose to like publish your books with. So it may become actually harder to get your work out there. And I'm saying, like, I'm all for anything, anybody being a bad guy, anybody being a good guy. You write your story that you want, you know, because I've seen it go both ways. There's 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 such thing as, you could say, okay, that sounds like it's like propaganda. Like, this person sounds like they're trying to villainize a certain type of people.
Yeah.
And then, but propaganda works both ways, though. That's the thing. And that's one thing that I think often gets overlooked is like, yes, you could say that this person, it seems as though the author is trying to villainize a certain type of people, or a certain, or a religion. It doesn't have to be people. It could be an idea, like an ideology or something, like
Hmm.
villainizing a religion or something, or a philosophy. But then there's like the opposite too, where it's like it's only positive propaganda. So it's like, there's people that's like, you can only ever say good things
Yeah.
about these people, and
Oh, like the female
that's
super characters that aren't
like, it's,
allowed to have emotion. They're not allowed to show weakness. They're not allowed to make mistakes.
yeah. And
Yeah.
what gets me is that, like, the positive thing where it's like, okay, so you mean to tell me that a character, just because they have a certain set of characteristics, you know, physical characteristics, or they believe in a certain religion or something like that, there's never in the history of the world there's ever been a villainous type of person that had those type of characteristics. I mean, are you kidding
Yeah.
me? That's
You know,
what I'm talking about. Like, this whole
yeah.
representation thing, it's a slippery slope.
Well, there's a couple of things to that. You know, the new Willow show that came out, people are complaining that the villains are black characters, like black POCs. But then they're also complaining that, you know, spoiler, Willow's not really in it. The show is actually about two female characters that are uh, both lesbians, and one's being forced to marry a prince that they don't want to marry, who the guy is a POC, but he's an idiot, right? Like, that's the way to. But you could also go the other route where you know, look, I'm Sicilian, right? Hey, forget about it, right? But and I grew up, you know, in New York.
Go.
Yeah, gubba gubba gabba goo, right? Uh, However, there is a difference between, say, Godfather, which you can watch and respect, and then, you know, the neighbor in Sleepless in Seattle. Yeah, I love the movie Sleepless in Seattle as like a, you know, a candy movie where you're just like, it's just something you have on. But that character is a complete stereotype of the Italian neighbor. He's got the big necklaces. He's always talking like this. He's like, "Hey, why don't you date me? You need me to beat him up, right?"
Is
And
it
but then you watch
uncomfortable?
The Godfather, and you're like, "That's a Sicilian character." You know, like, but they have weaknesses still. There's struggles. He has to kill his
Hey,
brother because his brother betrayed him. You know,
it's like the
Frodo.
it's like the dumb, you know, white guy husband. You know what I mean? the beta
The
white
beta
husband,
husband.
you know. So it's
Which
like
again, there's nothing wrong with a beta character. It's just when it's the beta character, and that's in representation. That's the big deal. Like, there's a difference between a character who has all these qualities, and it just so happens they're black, versus the black character. And that's where representation gets a little iffy, where it's like, yeah, you have representation, but it's not quality representation. Just the same way as like when I watch things, and I they have the Italian there because they need the mobster,
it's going to
or
be, it comes down to the writer too, because
yes,
the writer can do it. The writer can do all the above. If they want to if they want to, make a really heinous character, right?
yeah,
And that character does not represent who they are, or what they look like, then the writer could receive backlash, but they might not, because it depends how well they can construct that story around that character too. There's a certain level of tact to it, because I think that people can look through, like when you say, like when you like, well, it's noticeable by everybody. It's not just you.
yeah,
I mean, you can see in the mainstream, there's definitely, they kind of shoehorn. That's the word. They shoehorn
a
kind of
caricature,
these things
yeah,
in there, right? And it's and people notice it,
yeah.
but at the same time, I feel like, hey, they can do it if that's what they want to do. It's the saying, hey, if they want to go woke, go broke, that's their choice. If they want to do that, and I am cool with that. I think that people should be able to write the stories however they want to write them, and then it's going to be up to the audience to decide, wow, that was really weird, or
Well,
why did
the
they
audience
make
isn't.
that choice?
Yeah, but the audience isn't always the smartest choice. I mean, nowadays everybody has a voice and opinion, so they're like, "I didn't like the way it looked, so this movie or this show sucked, or this book was terrible." In reality, like again, I like Sleepless in Seattle. I think that character's a little outlandish and not really. Even though, like, if I let my accent come out, you'll really hear my Brooklyn, New York accent, uh, which is being slightly concealed, but it comes out. Uh, to me, representation starts first with their soul. Like, who are they? What are their morals? Even if they have flaws? Like, I don't think a villain is a bad choice for a representation, as long as that villain has purpose and real motivation. That's why, like, not that I'm a fan of the movie Black Panther 1 or 2, but in Black Panther, Killmonger has some depth to him. He's a black character, but he has depth to him. Like, even though, like, it literally comes down to, like, kill the white man.
I haven't seen the movies.
You don't have. But again, if you're writing, if you want to write a book,
Hey, they've had books like that. I mean, they have, like, how many books have you seen where it's like, oh, where the Nazis are the bad guys? Now
well,
think, if you want
they
to
they
write a
are
book
always the
where,
bad guys.
what I'm saying, if you want to write a book where they were the good guys, you could do it. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying you can write that story
You
if
can, but it
you
would have
want
to be
to.
fiction because it's so hard to figure such a. But again, the Russians have that too because they killed more people than the Germans. Before World War II, there was but they were killing their own people, like mass murder. Like it wasn't.
What I'm saying, it's a cliche.
It is a
So it
cliche.
should be. It's called what it is. If you want to practice artistic license,
Yeah,
that's what I believe in. I believe that the writer has that right to practice artistic license, however they see fit, to write the story that they want to write, to create the art that they want to create, whether
I
even if
agree.
you're doing film or something like that.
Yeah, 100%. Because the creative art aspect is for you.
That's why
Like,
critics, that gives critics something to do. I think, hey, you make the art, and then let the critics handle the
the critiquing,
criticizing, the tearing it apart. Go ahead, tear it to shreds.
but
Make
it's just
all the big
opinion. So
headlines.
yeah, they're all opinion. Like like in my early writing career, I was writing reviews for movies, and the editor literally goes, "I need a positive review for this," and I'm like, "Okay," and I go watch the movie, and I was like, "This is the worst movie since sliced bread,"
No.
but I had to make it positive. So in that sense, like critics aren't necessarily, they're just opinions.
Really? So
Yeah, yeah.
they're telling you, look, this needs to be positive.
It's not that it needed to be like, they were like, if you can't say anything nice, just make it a general review about the story. And that's usually why you'll get like, this
I
movie
can see
takes
that
the rock
happening.
through, like uh but I've sent in some scathing reviews, and they were just like, we can't publish this. I'm like, why not? They're like, you're going pretty heavy.
And
And I
that's the beauty of indie to me.
yeah,
It's like a no holds barred. We're still in the wild west in terms of indie, but I feel like as we kind of start building up these networks and stuff, you will kind of start to see, and another thing is with resources too.
yeah,
As resources become more affordable as well as accessible, the quality is only going to, and as we have continue to have conversations like this too, like around the scene, like I think that standard is going to kind of just elevate over time, and you'll see like less, kind of like get to the point where there will definitely be some, I don't know, it's too early to kind of make some predictions, but I think that there will definitely be some standout names, because I think that we're seeing the fall of like kind of like the big five.
oh, the big five
I don't
publishing
know if you're
companies.
familiar.
Yeah,
Well, one of my other topics is traditional publishing obsolete?
yeah.
Um,
I
I don't
mean,
know if you wanted to weigh in on that.
yeah, I actually want to bring that up. That's the next one on the list, but I kind of wanted to add a little bit more to representation, and
Sure.
just talk about that real quick. Um, the hardest part about representation is when it's like you're saying, forced representation, or a writer gets, like George R. R. Martin was called out for in his books, they're all white basically, and he's like, I'm an old white dude, but then in his response, he named a slew of other POC writers, talking about how their books are filled with representation, and it's great that they're being published, and which is true. Like it, you know, no one's knocking anyone for writing the books they're writing, unless they're the books, oh, that's not the book I want. And it's like, look, I'm going to write the books I want to write, and you
That
write the
see
books
that would
you
be a
want to
no.
write.
Think about that. Put yourself in his shoes. Okay,
Yeah.
you've put in the work, made a name for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and now you know, and which, not to say that the man doesn't get enough praise. Like, the guy is praised daily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure his name is praised daily. But to then turn around and like want people to like kind of like hijack your fame that you worked hard for, and kind of use you as their lightning rod, you know what I mean, for their agendas and whatnot. Like, I would get annoyed with that. Like, I would be like, listen guys, I write the stories, man. The stories are out there. You can say what you want to say
Yeah.
about them, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, are you writing for money? I can see someone, if they're writing for money, like that is the reason why they write, is just for money, then sure, they could probably somebody could hire them. Someone could just hire George to just write that
Yeah, like
that
money should
story.
be, money should be the reward for being honest and truthful in your creative process. But R. R. Martin, though, he does state, like, he's like, I don't, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna write what I write. If you don't like it, you don't have to read it. If you want more representation, go read the other books.
That's what I'm saying. If it's not like
Yeah, like, he
why does it
doesn't care.
have to be the top
Yeah, the
guy?
top dog.
Like,
Yeah,
why, are all these other people just chopped liver? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, there are so many writers out there like just waiting to be discovered, and that they're putting out quality work. And just because it always comes back to this like popularity thing, this popularity game, where it's like, yeah, but
yeah,
you can, a writer can become somebody with enough support,
yeah,
and it may not take that much, because now with the type of technology that we have with social media and everything,
Just need a good TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, word of mouth can go like lightning speed compared to what it used to back in the day, like in the 90s or 80s or any time really before then.
Yeah,
So,
but I would add, just overall, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Is that uh, at the end of the day, what kind of story are you telling? If it's an intimate story about two characters, and it just so happens that two characters are white, their world is probably going to be pretty isolated. You're not talking about the world they live in. You're not like exploring the city. It's just about them. However, if you're writing an epic fantasy that travels over the world, worlds are massive, filled with diversity and stuff like that. And you know, uh, like in my story, I have two sons, right? That burn over the planet. So I don't have black characters and white characters. I have characters that need to block the two suns from burning the hell out of them. But they're not Africans, they're not Jamaicans, they're not Haitians, they're not Dominicans, they're not from Puerto Rico, they're not right. They're from this planet.
right.
So I don't need to write them with the culture of Earth because it's not Earth. It's its own. But I have two sons. They're dark skinned. Now, the way I write it is I stay away from, I don't care that they have dark skin, and I like some of them have, yellow eyes or orange eyes or blue eyes or brown eyes. They're not like, well, they have to all have dark eyes because they're dark skin. You're like, no, they're from a fucking space planet. It's a fantasy about the medieval times, but it has nothing to do with Earth. But at the same time, I have different sexual orientations in the book because why wouldn't there be if it's such a mass world? Like, no, but at the same time, I also have vampires that aren't
There's
vampires. They're they survive off of blood, but they don't
they
live.
must live underground with the two suns.
Well, that's the thing. They're Laris, and they actually get their power from the sun. So it's like a reversed concept of they're
Subverting the trope, huh?
That's right. I'm trying. But again, there's dragons and there's giants and there's like there's the Valus and there's the Akids and there's none of them are from Earth.
Yeah. On BookTube, I watch BookTube, and yeah, I mean, sometimes they get into that. With fantasy, is always kind of veiled, anyways. Like it's not, sometimes it's thinly veiled, and other times it's like, it's like you're saying, like you're kind of trying to use the world building to kind of explain why all these characters are the way they are and look the way they look and act the way they do, which makes sense.
Yeah, and they could have like long, thin, wavy hair and still have dark skin because they're not from Earth.
Exactly.
They're their own creation with their own evolution.
It's
But
fantasy.
yeah. All right, so let's go to the next topic. So traditional publishing has pros and cons, like self-publishing, but is traditional publishing forcing itself into an obsolete corner? Yes, they pick up the cost for editing, design, etc. They help with large shelf reach, but finding a publisher willing to take a risk on an unknown, or more specifically, a person who believes they are well beyond ready to be seen, yet the publishers can see they are not there yet, which leads to self publishing and the limitations of the paths leading to traditional publishing have seemed to change the game itself. Look at Brandon Sanderson and his Kickstarter campaign, landing him about $42 million. All right.
Yeah, I know that.
So the question remains, as you said, the big five and stuff like that, is traditional publishing failing or becoming obsolete because self-publishing has allowed a saturation of what's the word I'm looking for? Not, the quality control is not necessarily there because it doesn't have to be. No one is reading his books going, no, I can't publish it. Amazon is like, yeah, go ahead, follow the process and get your book out there. But someone like Brandon Sanderson, who was reliant on traditional publishing, was able to publish 4 books through Kickstarter.
When you see guys, that's my take on that, is when you see guys like who are coming from the mainstream, like Sanderson, and making a move like that, and kind of going like this hybrid model, or even at least kind of doing things, kind of breaking off and doing his own thing. That actually is a statement in and of itself, that we're on the precipice of a new paradigm altogether. And I think that independent media is only going to become more prevalent as we move forward, because of, well, a lot of factors. I mean, the accessibility to resources, the affordability of resources, and then social media like this, like where there are no gatekeepers
Yeah.
anymore. It's just I'm strong proponent of where there's a will, there's a way. So if you want to do something, who's stopping you? Nobody's stopping me. I'm doing it. I've done it. Like, I have works published. That's proof in the pudding right there. It's
Yeah.
not saying, I'm coming on here and just talking on YouTube and I've never produced anything. Like, no, I can point to something and say, yes, I've done something. So I'm saying, like, it's possible. Now, does that mean that you get fame? That's a whole nother ball game.
Well, yeah,
That
fame
has
is
to
like
do with,
imprint marketing and
yeah, that has to do with marketing and advertising. That has nothing to do with, do you want to become a writer? Do you want to get into writing? Do you want to build up a body of work? And then whether or not you get people to read your work, like that's a whole, that's a
it's a
whole
whole
nother
different
thing.
thing.
So, like, and with indie and with as far as I've read, I don't know if you're familiar with the HarperCollins situation, with the
No.
strike. There's a strike going on with employees at HarperCollins, like wanting an affordable or livable
Oh,
wage.
living wage. Yeah.
So, and they're actually, it's interesting because in the article that they are actually for the auto workers union. So, like, it's the auto workers union is representing the
That's interesting.
employees at HarperCollins.
Yeah.
So I just found that was kind of
That
gave
is,
me a
yeah.
chuckle,
They're just
because
driving it home.
yeah,
Boom-tsh.
yeah, it's
You think
like
they're getting tired of it? It's the
maybe
engine that
they.
can go.
So it's just, I don't know. As far as trad goes, I think the writing is on the wall as far as that goes, because I feel like it's just so easy now for the individual to kind of either A, go the self pub route, or B, hook up with an independent label, which is what I was going to mention before, where, okay, so maybe we don't have the big five, or they're going to turn into like a hybrid model. Definitely going to downsize. I think that's what you could look forward to in the future, is the big five downsizing, mergers going on like as time goes on. So, like, the big five may become the big four, then the big three, and then maybe it'd be the big two on the block, and then that's it. Um, but um, but then it's really, I mean, you're going to see the rise, like, as that's happening, you also see the rise of indie. So then there's going to be some big names, in the indie scene.
Yeah.
So like I said before, you could do the self pub route, or you could hook up with an established independent label. So, like, there would be indie labels that have been in the game for a while, and I think that's, if you want to get in on the indie scene, now would be the time, and start building up that brand name, start building up that brand recognition, like, get and build up a label for yourself, and not just maybe do it just under your name. You could, but I think that in as far as in a marketing sense, in the long run, at
Yeah.
least, it might be smarter to just kind of have like an indie label and do it that way.
The issue with a lot of that is a very few self-published authors hire editors because they could do it themselves. They think they don't hire book art creators. the graphic artists. They don't put any money into marketing other than maybe ads, which is not real marketing.
We'll bring up the art. Save that art thing for.
Oh yeah, the AI. The other horrible reality of it is they wait until they have a book before they brand, and they allow the book to be the not only the brand, but their
But how they
flagship.
represent themselves on
Yeah,
social
and
media.
you are not your book.
Right.
If you were your book, when you did interviews, they would just read your book on air. They wouldn't ask you questions. And they
Right.
only ask you questions that have nothing to do with your book. It's usually about your journey, your life, your family, things you've gone through, funny stories, so people can relate to you like a human being. But no one reads the book. No one's on there. It's like, hey, I'm on Jay Leno tonight, and Jay Leno just goes, all right, let's look at the first couple pages here and say, oh, they're in the kingdom. That's not what they do. However, self-publishing leads to I'll let the book speak for itself. And when it comes to marketing, your book is the last point of reference. I'll give you two quick stories. The first one is when I met one of my first big mentors in the music industry. He sat me down and he goes, I just want you to know I'm never going to listen to your music. And I was like, who he was, it makes it funny because he was a president of a record label. And he's telling me, I will never listen to your music. I go, why not? I go, why am I even here then? He goes, because your
You have your
brand.
mixtape in your pocket and you're like
Yeah.
pushing it down so he doesn't see it.
Well, he already took my CD because it had on it thegreatestband.com. Right. And he asked me, he goes, is this true? And as a joke, I was like, absolutely. Like I have fun. I don't have like an ego like that. And he's like, I want to work with you. And I was like, okay, like whatever. He was an old guy. My brain was stupid when I was younger. Anyway, we got together and he's like, I was like, how did you like the CD? He goes, I didn't listen to it and I will never listen to it. I go, why do you even want to? He goes, because your brand, you understand brand and marketing. I went and did some research on you after I saw your band website and stuff, and you know what you're doing, and that's what makes careers possible. He goes, there's no such thing as money because of music in this industry. No one buys Motley Crue music.
Well,
I'm talking about
aside
back,
from Motley Crue, but just look at what's being put out now as far as music goes with auto tune and all that stuff.
That's not even the issue though. Like, that's not what sells anything. Taylor Swift sells music because she's Taylor Swift, not because she made a song. They want to know, oh, is this song about a boyfriend she just broke up with? I know that relationship. I've been following that relationship. Dream Theater, still one of the biggest progressive metal bands out there, been around for almost 30 years or plus probably at this point. They don't sell CDs because they wrote music. They sell CDs because they had Dream Theater.
I don't know. I guess this is kind of, I think that this is a subject where, I don't know, I kind of take a different approach where I say, like, I think the art can speak for itself because an artist.
But then you never get anywhere. Like,
I get it. Like, again, like I say, I have no problem with people who write to market or, produce or make products, you know what I mean, for consumption, based on demographic statistics and advertising techniques. But I think that if people can connect with your work, I think if people can connect with your work, that means something too. Like,
well, that's
you can
important
lead.
for the long run.
I think you can lead with your work. I think that's possible. I mean, I can't say from experience because I'm not, a famous artist as of yet. But, I think that I definitely think that there are people who have done that. I mean, like, what about like Quentin Tarantino or someone like that, you know.
He's not a good example because I could tell you his story. His story started out as he built relationships within the industry. He proved his worth by working with other people. He was hired to clean up a script. They liked his cleanups and asked him to work on another script, which led to him writing a script, which eventually became True Romance, which he didn't direct. He just wrote. Wasn't his story. He was hired to do it, which led to another opportunity, which is he filmed and paid for out of his own pocket Reservoir Dogs, which the original movie was never shown, but he made friends with people that led to Miramax connections, and they liked him as a person and were willing to invest in him. And then they said, all right, we're going to pick up your movie and, we're gonna showcase it. And then he created a deal with them, a first look deal. Plus, he's like, I want to write and direct my stuff, but he
So
had
would you
to
say
establish.
Reservoir Dogs not a good movie though?
Let's say it is a good
He
movie.
paid his dues.
No,
It sounds like
all right,
he's someone, he's put in the footwork. I'm not
which
saying you
cancels
can't do
out,
that. I can't.
the movie was good. Like, he didn't become successful because that movie was good. He became successful
I
because
know. I see what you're saying.
he built
I
his
understand where you're
brand,
coming from.
and people were like, oh, Quentin worked on that. Like, if you look at
I
who's
can't
the guy
say.
who did
I'm
the
not
new
saying you
Star
shouldn't
Trek?
be a mover and shaker. You definitely got to do some moving and
Oh yeah,
shaking. You got
yeah,
to
yeah,
rub elbows. You
yeah, yeah.
can't just say. You can't just be that. You know, I've seen it. I've already seen that. I've seen people in the indie scene where they think like, they've made, they've written one novel,
Yeah.
and that's their debut novel, and then they just say, that's it, and then just like, okay, guys, and then just start like they come out of the blue. In other words, like this is an unknown. This is
Yeah.
just somebody like out of the blue hops into the scene, and they're like, I got my debut novel is coming out, next month.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. And just tell everybody about it. They're very excited. You can tell there's the excitement there.
Yeah.
And I know that feeling. I know that feeling. And it's just like you can tell that they're new to the scene. Like like if
Yes.
you've been in the scene, who's new to the scene, not just because you've never seen them before,
Yeah.
but because of the way that they're presenting themselves. You know what I mean? It's all very much a look what I've done, as if they're the first person to ever write a
A
novel
book.
from
Yeah.
their neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like
To be fair, though, there are two. It's actually, I shouldn't even say there's two trains of thoughts. There's two. So the way I was brought up and what allows me to do like what I do is there's two brains that are functioning. There's your business brain and your artist brain. When you're doing art, don't let your business brain get involved. Just be an artist, create, do it for yourself. It's your passion. Let it be true to what's important to you. But as soon as you're done with that book, the moment you want to make money, you have to shut the artist brain off and now go to the business brain to do what? Network, market, and understand the industry. So that book can be pure. Now, don't get me wrong. If somebody just wants to publish their book and just put it out there, and they have these huge hopes and dreams that they're going to sell a million copies because their book is so amazing, awesome, unique, I don't want to discourage that person. If that's the path you want to go, do it. I've been in the industry so long and I've had so many mentors and in the business, all different aspects of the industry from the music to the movies, like I've worked on Saturday Night Live and stuff. And I can tell you right now, the moment you want to make a living, this has nothing to do with the creative aspect. That's separate. But the moment you want to make a living, it has nothing to do with your creative element. And I'll explain why. If you publish a book, okay, and you hide in the house and maybe on social media you go, hey, I have a book coming out next month. It's my first book, buy it. And that's the extent of your real marketing budget. Okay, let's be honest. That's usually what the marketing, right, for independent author. And you put that book out. Let's just assume 1,000 people buy that book. I'm definitely inflating the potential number, right? Because the average sales are 35 to 100 for a released book for an indie artist. I don't know if you know those numbers, but let's just assume they sold 1,000. This is the issue if you allow your book to talk for you. You release your second book, and let's say your second book has nothing to do with the first book. It doesn't have the same themes. It could have the same characters, but it doesn't have the same themes. It doesn't have the same feel, the same flow. The way the cover is completely different. You're using different fonts. What happens is now you have to resell yourself to those same 1,000 people. And if those same 1,000 people buy that book and it's not the same experience as your first book, because that's the only thing they connected to, you're going to lose the majority of the people who bought the second book because they bought your first book. But if you're Stephen King, they're not buying your book because it's that book. They're buying it because they know what they're getting from Stephen King.
Right.
The same as Brandon Sanderson making $42 million. They know whatever book he writes, the quality of his voice and their connection to Brandon Sanderson's, and the fact that, and I'm not saying this to make fun of him because I'm a nerd. He's a nerd. He's he plays games. When he's teaching, he stutters like right? He can't spell words. Oh my God, we're the like. And people support him because they embrace who he is and they have a kinship to him.
But I'm the type that I separate the art from the artist in some regard. I really don't. I mean, aside from some musicians and whatever and whatnot, like musicians, I would look up, members of metal bands or rock bands or something like that to see if they have interviews online or whatever. But in terms of, I've never looked up anything on Arthur C. Clarke. For instance,
fine. Well, let's
you know what I mean. I've never I like Arthur C. Clarke just because of his book. You know what I mean? The book, it's the book itself that I like.
Let's talk about that.
Not
what is it about that book you liked? Was it the themes? Was it it wasn't just the plot.
Well, I know where you're coming from in terms of building a name for yourself.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's not the book. In other words, the title of the book. And people are saying, oh, that title, that book sounds interesting. No, you're buying it because it's a Sanderson, because it's a King.
Yeah, no one's going to buy your book because you published a book.
And I understand that aspect of it. I'm a proponent for that. And I say that, if you're especially in the indie scene, because I've said this on numerous accounts, that the indie scene is not mainstream. It's not about ideology. In other words, the mainstream is more of that ideology aspect to it, of fame and celebrity and cult of personality. Whereas the indie scene is more of community based. It's who knows who and who's working with who, and
which is relationship building.
Yeah. You got to move around. You got to put yourself out there. And I agree with that aspect. And that's kind of how you build your name especially in the indie scene. Not just because of your work, but because of your deeds. What are you doing? How are you involved in the scene? Are you proactive, or are you just one of those people that are buy my book?
Please buy. Here's my book again. Well, to put it into perspective, even people who get signed traditionally don't always succeed because they leave it. Let's put it this way. I worked with a publishing company because my literary agent at the time had a publishing company, but he was my literary agent for scripts and TV and film. And he hired me to help his authors. All right. And one of the authors has been writing for 20 years. They had 15 books. They were all really good books, but they couldn't sell anything. And the reason is because they refused to do interviews. They refused to put any money towards marketing, because if the publishing company marketed it, they would have to pay that money back. But because they weren't selling anything, they were like, no, because I'll never make any money. But you're not making any money now. And this is the reality of it. It doesn't matter if you're self-published or traditionally published. If you put a book out there, you have to understand the pathway to purchase. Okay? Marketing 101 is all about in-print marketing. The more someone sees something, the more likely they're going to buy it, right? Now, if you don't have the money for marketing, you might as well, or advertisement, you might as well throw that theory out the window. However, let's say you publish a book, John, and all you do is put it on Amazon, and you go on your social media and you say, hey, my book's out. Let's just say that's the extent you do it. Somebody has to, let's assume they don't know you, by the way. Somebody has to see your book cover and be like, that cover is interesting enough for me to look at the title. And this is all quick. Then they read the title. Then the title has to be interesting enough and fit the theme of the cover for them to go, let me read the back of the book. Then the back of the book has to fit the theme, the feel, and the flow of the plot that fits the title and the book cover. If those
Basically,
three,
what you're getting at here is a big ask.
it's a
You're saying
huge
it's a big ask
because they
for
don't
a
know
no
anything.
name for
For a
an
no name.
unknown to just be like, buy my book, and I get that.
This is the reality. I made more money in the music industry doing things for people than I did selling my music, and I was able to retire. Not from my music, and not that my music wasn't good, because we played festivals all the time and we toured Canada and New York. Like we were pretty good back then, but I made more money doing studio work for people. If somebody wanted me to write lyrics for them, if somebody wanted me to do a solo, if they wanted me to play on like, I made more money playing on stage for another band than I did selling my music. But
And
again,
that's what I feel like. There's you got to kind of embrace that. Like, in other words, like kind of it's not to say that you can't have those dreams of being, the famous artist. You're going to
yeah,
be the next, whatever you want. It's good to have those kind of fantasies or dreams if you want. It like builds up, it kind of keeps that fire going inside of you and keeps you passionate about what it is that you do. But at the same time, understand that there's so many, like, that's one of the heavy hitters for me, because for the longest time, like when I first got into fiction, I would say is when
yeah.
I noticed it, because the first book that I published was in 2015, and that was just because I wanted to get into ebooks, and then
Mhm.
I put it into print later, but I just wanted to just get something published and just say that I
Yeah.
published something. And for me, like, the biggest thing for the longest time, I wasn't really involved in, as far as in the publishing scene, the independent publishing scene. In other words, rubbing elbows with other people
Yeah.
and getting involved in groups and stuff like that. I was kind of just doing my own thing, focused on my own thing. But then as soon as I kind of shifted into fiction and started getting into creative writing, and then I just saw just the sheer amount of people
Yeah.
that are writers, call themselves writers, and off and have actually even have some works
Yeah.
published. And I'm like, okay, this is like, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. I
Yeah.
have to I have to start meeting people. I have to start reaching out to people. I have to start having conversations with other people, and that is how I'm going to kind of be able to build up a name for myself, and maybe gain some recognition for my work.
That's how I got a career in writing, by the way. Okay. So once I retired from music, what I did was I started writing, and then I realized, wait, why don't I just approach this how I approached my music career? So I started getting involved with other people, and I didn't say I was a writer or that I wanted to write. I would just get involved with them, just surround myself with people that were either working on projects, who were comedians, anything that had to do with writing. I was like, let me just hang out with them. If they're working on something, I'll just support their thing. I won't ask them for anything. I want to elevate others in this industry. And that'll showcase my value set, what I bring to the table ultimately. And it has nothing to do with I write. It's just like, if I'm involved with you, this is what I can help you with, which means they'll ask me again, which means they'll refer me. And it always happened. Somebody would work with me. I'd grow a relationship. They go, hey, can you help me with this joke? Can you help me write this joke? And I would do it for free. And then somebody was writing a book, and I would go, oh, they would go, hey, don't you write or something because you started in comics? I go, yeah. It's like, can you help me with an outline or something? I was like, yeah, sure. I could help you with plot, narrative, and stuff at the time because I wasn't an outliner in the beginning, and I would do it for free. But what would happen is somebody would refer me because they were like, oh, he did a great job helping me with the blank, blank, blank. And then I just started getting referrals all the time. And again, I make more money in writing for people than I do selling my own product, which, by the way, gives me the freedom to do what you're talking about. I don't have a day job. Like, I don't need to go to work. So I'll get gigs and I'll take a month or two to write a gig, and then I don't need money for a while. Right. But the thing is, I could release a book that I'm passionate about, that is true to my voice, that is important to me, and I don't care if it sells.
Right.
And
Right.
that's how my music career blew up, because I didn't care about my music selling. I cared that I wrote music that I liked writing, and I made my money doing the other things. And I think if authors understand that it's okay to just publish your book, but the moment you want to make money, it's a business. You cannot make money as an artist. No artist does, even painters. Do you think painters make money because they paint? No. Because if that was the case, you know how many people would be making millions of dollars as painters? Anyone who sits in their house.
Oh, I mean, I know there's some of those guys in the comic books corner of YouTube that can make 5 figures for their work, but you know,
How did they get there?
different industry, but at the same time, also, writers that have done like ghost writing gigs for like 4 figures easily.
Yeah.
So I mean, the money is out there, but like you say, it's definitely about building a name for yourself. So, and by building a name for yourself, that's not necessarily connected to your work. It's
Correct.
what are you bringing to the table? And when you say you were doing things for free, I come from the mindset like, I know what you mean by that, but I don't see it as doing it for free. It's almost like you're planting seeds.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
saying you're bringing something to the table and you're cultivating
Yep.
relationships.
Correct.
You're cultivating
Well, your
connection. You're
impression.
making connections,
Yeah.
and right, you're cultivating relationships, and that can actually grow into something of value, fruit for later. That
Yeah.
could be fruitful later on.
Well,
If you can, people work with people,
yes.
we're definitely
Well, they
going
work
to
with
see
people they
more of
like.
that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's another thing. But we're definitely going to see more of that as we go into the future, and as the independent scene continues to rise. That's what people who have this mindset of I'm going to be the next big artist, they're going to come to that same conclusion.
Yeah.
That people work with people, and because I know that people there are other writers in the scene and stuff, they can become so frustrated when they see other indie authors gain so much success, and then they read their book and then they say, wow, this book is trash.
Yeah.
Why are they so popular? Why are so
That's
many
nothing to do with
people
the
reading
book.
the book? It's not the book. It's they were most likely doing things behind the scenes.
Yep.
They're cultivating relationships. They probably have done many favors over the years for different types of people or
Yep.
whatnot, and it's
Which is
just
okay.
that position themselves at a point where the stars were aligned and they're like, okay, it's time to put out your work now, or put out something, and that thing is going to catch the vapors, because you're going to have the support of all these different types of people that maybe you helped out along the way.
When I have clients, they're like, they'll say to me, "Go, I want to make a living getting to write." And I go, "You mean like write, or do you mean like write your books?" And they're like, "Yeah, I want my books to make me money." And I go, "All right." And I start explaining the process. You got to network, market, and practice. You got right. It's who you know, who knows you, and how well you know yourself, so you could add value to the tables. And they go, "No, no, no. I'm gonna let my book speak for myself." So then I tell them, "Okay, put your book on the table." And they go, what? I go, well, first of all, why are they going to buy your book? And it's like, well, because I think it has really great subject matter in it. It's great themes. I go, so you're saying if I read your book, I'm going to be like, I need to buy this book because it's so awesome. And they're like, no, no, no. The book itself has those qualities, and that's going to make people want to buy it. And I go, okay, put it on the table. I put it on the table. I go, how many sales did you make? And they go, what do you mean? I go, well, the book is going to sell itself. You're saying because it has these themes in it, people are going to gravitate towards the book. And they go, well, no, I gotta put the book out there. I go, well, that's marketing. I go, you said you don't want a network marketer practice. Right? It's like, do you want your friends to read the book? You're going to ask for their opinions? Well, yeah. I go, that's networking. And I go, how are you going to sell the book? What are you going to sell the book at? Well, I don't know. You don't know how much you're going to charge for this book. Well, how many pages is it? He goes, oh, it's this many pages. I go, all right, you're going to do hardcover, soft cover. Why? Well, it changes the price. And why is that important? Why can't I just charge $20? Because $20 might be too little or too much, depending on the book. And that's the practice of understanding your industry. So the three elements that get you to sell that book that you don't want to do literally are the things that you have to do that you said you are going to do. So if you understand them, you can actually make a plan and move forward. Like, for example, do you have a book you're working on right now, Jonathan, that you want to publish one day?
Nope.
All right.
Well, I mean, no, I do have some ideas for some novels, but I'm not ready for a novel yet. I do short stories, so I have
That's still fine.
I publish short stories individually, and then as I have a full volume of them,
like
then I'll do a limited edition paperback. That's my model right now.
May I give you advice in real time
Sure.
on the show? Okay. The way to build the most return for those short stories individually and the short stories as a collective is that you need to talk about your journey of writing those stories and not the stories themselves. It's less important that you say this book has really great elements to it, because that's a lie. The proof is my experience as the audience, and I can't prove that theory until I read your stuff. But if I have to buy it to prove it, I'm not going to buy the book. But if you talk about your journey and how you found these stories or what they mean to you, or even, this week I finally had a chance to clean up one of my short stories, the trials and tribulations of your story, your personal story, is how people connect to you. And then when you do release the story, for money or not, people who have already connected to your journey are going to support that book because they support you.
Oh, I definitely see that as like a winning, or definitely a workable strategy in terms of public relations. Like there's booktubers that have done that too. Like people, they start in booktube just reading books, and then they say they are niche. So fantasy is big. So they read the fantasy books, and then, oh guys, I'm gonna try to get into writing, and lo and behold, then they have a novella out, and then all their their followers or subscribers are going to want to check it out. Not necessarily, even if it's not even necessarily an interesting sounding premise. It's just because they have the support because of the public relations. But that's, that takes time.
It does
to build
take time.
Build that kind of trust with your, not only build an audience, but also, cultivate that level of trust where they're just like, whatever you put out, man, I'm buying it.
George Lucas, do you think he started filming Star Wars when he was 15?
I don't know.
He wasn't 15 when he directed Star Wars, right? It took a long time for him to get to that point after deciding. And by the way, he originally wanted to be someone who was like a car guy. Like he wanted to work on cars, a mechanic. He just went to film school as like a secondary thing. And, same thing with Steven Spielberg. He had to get involved with the studios for them to offer him Jaws. The director left Jaws and it was like a failing movie and they were losing money.
I take Hollywood. I take all the Hollywood stories though with a grain of salt, because
all right, that's fine.
I feel like it's kind of a good old boys club too, behind the scenes as well. That incorporates,
it's like that,
like fraternal orders and stuff like that. So
it's like that in every industry. Like one of my biggest publishing meetings came from somebody who was in the publishing industry that I have a really good relationship with. So, like I would have never gotten that meeting if I didn't have that third party introduction. So every element of the industry is sort of like that, but it's going to take time. And like, you should technically start now, even if your book won't come out for 3 years. Like you should start that journey and start letting people even your like, let's say your book themes are about um the uh the response to war and how it influences culture and the economic industry. Let's just say that's the intense theme. If you talk about those ideas in general and you prove your expertise on understanding that, then when your book comes out and it's about those themes, people are going to buy into that. If you love war, like if you were writing Jack Reacher, like you should be talking about those elements that are in Jack Reacher, which might not necessarily be about soldiers or Marines or people that were, but maybe the themes about taking law into your own hands because right is right. Right, that's one of the themes of Jack Reacher. It's all about right is right. That's why he left the police, the military police, because you know he does what's right, even when what's right seems wrong. Because he'll just kill if he has to kill. He beats you up if he has to beat you up, right? And that's the element that will lead to audiences going, oh yeah, he's true to his word. He right, like I write about loyalty and teamwork and helping people, and success comes when everybody kind of gets together and works but like when they're not in the story, it's falling apart. There's no unison, right? If there's no loyalty, if it fails, if there's if they're not whatever the case may be, the things I talk about, which you listen to me when I talk on myself, right? The stuff I post on social media, it's things that are so important to me. And I learned that actually from that mentor in the music industry. Is like, I know he was like, I know you're doing like dark and scary stuff, but you should really be true to yourself. And I was like, So when we played music, we were dark and scary playing music. But when I was talking between songs, I was more myself. I made jokes at my expense. If people were clapping, I was like, "Of course you're clapping." I do a voice. Obviously, look how amazing we are. We're the greatest band in the world. Like, and that made us blow up because I was that person. I was just darker. I was doing scarier, and it
maybe
once
you were going. Maybe you were just going through a phase.
I definitely
think
could
that
have been going through a phase.
if we're going to be talking about journeys, I mean, maybe there is that that
Yeah.
dark portion of your life. You're like, oh yeah, I remember those years.
Yeah, the
Those
evil
years were dark.
scariness. Well,
Yeah.
actually, my band was related to my book world. So like all my stories and my band, they're all related and stuff like that. But I embraced what made me feel good, and my career just blew up from there, just in all aspects. And that's really what theme
I
writing
think
is
that
about.
shows in writing too.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you're going to be able to tell when, in other words, you're going to be able to tell. It may show in your writing. In other words, you may be able to tell when you're not being genuine,
Correct.
and it might feel forced. It might
Yeah.
feel shoehorned, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, like I can't write a political thriller. I have no interest in that world. Like, even though I study politics because I want to be in the know, I don't want to be like, I didn't know we were in a nuclear war. Like, I study it just enough to be in the know, but I don't understand it enough to write about it because I'm not running for office. I don't support running for,
Right.
that's not
Right.
my world. My world is people. My world is,
Being authentic, in other words.
yeah, exactly.
Write what you know.
Before we end the show, I want to ask the second question that you had picked at the top of the show before we started recording. All right, here it goes. All right, this is for you. This is for you, John.
Shoot.
Shoot. The process of writing is different for each writer, and the insight to how we all approach it can help others see that it's okay to be different. With that said, what comes first for you, the plot or the characters, and why?
Definitely plot. For me, like I say, I like to write stories that have a message. So definitely, definitely the plot, because the plot for me is definitely the driver. You could have a character driven story, you could have a plot driven story, but for me, the plot is kind of like the bread and butter. It's like um, all the events that are taking place. So, especially with short story, that may change with novel format, but for me, with short story format, your short stories operate differently than a novella and a novel.
Yeah.
You have limited amount of space that you're working with, and you got to kind of just like get right down to business. So, characters are, not to say that a short story can't be character driven, but you're not going to have the type of character development like you're going to have a full kind of character arc in that you would see in like a epic fantasy or something like that in a short story format. So that's why for me, that's why I go with plot. And when dealing with a message, it's easier to avoid uh, those traps of stereotypes and this and that
Mm.
when the message is more embedded in the plot than it is attached to a particular character. So, in other words, instead of a particular character being, the all American hero, it's more like it's embedded in the plot, and the plot acts upon the characters. So now the characters either have to step up the task and they have to find the strength within themselves to do the thing with the stuff, or not. So it's like the plot acting on the characters, forcing the characters to make a decision or make the choices,
I'm
which
assuming you allow plot to build your world as well instead of world building through plot, right? Like you allow the plot to dictate what you're going to learn about the world. You know how like some writers are just like, I want people to know that this tree has a history to it, but it has nothing to do with the story. And it's like,
I kind of just start with a setting. Like I'll get a setting first, and then it's just the rest of it just kind of comes to me.
yeah. When you're thinking of the plots, are you more in tune with like an idea that's interesting to you? Sort of like the idea might be the conflict of person A and person C, and that specific conflict you kind of want to explore emotionally, and that's why you look at it, or um, are your plots a little bit more surface level?
Well, for one, it okay. So, for instance, in one of my short stories, Drone, it's a it's a sci-fi, and it has to do with the battle between man and machine,
Okay.
and more specifically with artificial intelligence. Man, we're in a story where mankind has already been virtually enslaved by artificial intelligence. And in the story, there's different types of more like new age type themes. For instance, there's one of the characters that you're introduced early in the story who is actually um, trans, and then the father of that character comes from the old world before the AI had taken
Mm.
over everything. So there's dealing with those types of themes. I start with, okay, this is what I want to write a story about. I want to write a story where AI has already enslaved mankind. Now,
Okay.
what does that world look like? And how can I incorporate themes that are relevant to today to
Mm.
kind of ground that um, concept in our reality? Like, how could people, like, instead of going off the wall with it and having
Yeah.
all these zany things going on, you know what I mean? And people are like, okay, you know, how can I even begin to connect with this story? So I try to create these characters and things that are relevant to what's going on in our world, but incorporate that within that story with using those types of themes. So I almost use those themes
Yeah.
as a vehicle to kind of like illustrate the overall plot, and the characters are really just driving that message home.
Yeah, I like that because it's almost like you're starting with the surface level, but then as you plant the seeds and you like water the idea, it becomes something deeper, and you're actually it's almost like, yeah, man versus AI, but in reality, it's all about the roots that have grown because you've been watering the trees and the plants, and that's the part that seems to fuel your interest. Is like, you know,
And with the character, that's not the point of the story. So what I'm getting at is who the characters are is not the point of the story. The characters are actually a byproduct of the world that they're living in. You see what I'm saying? So
yeah,
that's what I mean by it's plot driven, not character driven in that aspect. So that's why I start with the plot first. The plot is an AI has virtually enslaved mankind. Now, what does the world look like? And what kind of care? And who are the people that live in this world? The people who live in this world are just a byproduct of the
yeah.
environment that they're living in.
I mean, we definitely have to close up, but I would love to definitely have you on in season 3, and like really discuss the concept of character driven versus plot driven. Because,
Sure.
and I will just say this without trying to provoke a new conversation, but to get the audience thinking, all stories, character driven, quote unquote, character driven or not, are plot driven. And when people say character driven, they usually mean like, oh, I focus on the characters and their conversations. You're like, if the moment they have to do something, it's no longer character driven, it's plot driven. Otherwise, it's people hanging out in a room talking about nothing with no destination. And there's no such thing as a character driven story, in my opinion, based on the rules of story. It's
Look
a
at you
complete
pitching a
story when
hot
there's a plot.
topic over there.
What?
Look at you pitching a hot topic over there.
I'm just saying, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, I want the audience to think about that. So when I have you back on, we could really attack that, and maybe we'll even try to get a third author on, and then kind of like get 3 perspectives going. But with that, for the audience listening through audio, how can they find you?
You can find me at www.livefreeliverich.com or simply Google my name and you can find out.
Yeah, all his information will be in the description of both the audio and the YouTube video. However, if you're listening and driving and you're like, oh, let me put that in my head, there you go. Is there anything you want to pitch? Anything you're like, hey, by the way, you could check my show out every Monday, right? You're every Monday night at 9 or something, or 8.
Yes. Yeah. Just that's it. I do run a live stream on YouTube every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 p.m. Pacific. And if you're a writer, artist, or if you're on BookTube, you're just a reader, or you're just interested in watching this new paradigm shift here and going through this cultural shift with independent publishing, you can tune in and become a participant of the show.
Awesome. And just for anyone listening, Jonathan has a very interactive YouTube channel. He loves the interaction, and he definitely rewards the interaction. And that's one of the things that really sparked me to say I want to get you on the show, because I love how inclusive you are. Speaking of, like diversity and all that stuff and representation, like you don't care who people are, as long as there's a conversation going, you're willing to have it. And I think that's important for our community, the writers community and stuff like that. But with that said, we're going to do our goodbyes. John, thank you so very much for coming on. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Thomas.
it. And we'll definitely get you on for the next season. And to the audience out there, as always, keep developing the right mindsets.